We are in, right now, a time period of the year known as, in the occult, specifically the dark occult, as the season of sacrifice. So what does this mean? What is this time period, and what does it represent? On slide number 1 for tonight, you'll see the image of the zodiac wheel representing the course of 1 year. Okay? I've placed on this image the sun at the middle, because what the zodiac constellations really are about are the path of the sun relative to the path of the earth. That's all it really is. It's a way of tracking time. As the year progresses, the sun can be seen to rise in front of a different zodiacal house at approximately a 1-month period. For approximately a 1-month period. Then after a month duration, it can be seen to be rising on the eastern horizon in front of a different zodiacal house. Okay? This is just a method of looking at the solar movement, or really it's the Earth's movement around the sun during the course of a year, like one big clock, with 12 hour hands, but they really represent 1 month. Okay, so each zodiacal house represents about a month's time. Now, the ancients divided the zodiacal year into quarters. Okay, you had the time period of the year where there were equal amounts of day and night because of the Earth's axis of rotational tilt with respect to its plane of orbit. I know that's a mouthful, but if you just envision the sun at the middle and the Earth going around the sun, making a revolution around the sun in its orbital pathway, you have to also envision that the Earth is tilted with respect to that plane of orbit at approximately 23.5 degree angle. Its axis of rotation is tilted. So that is what creates our seasons. Okay? And when the sun is actually at a 0 degree angle to the equator of the Earth, that is when the Earth, the time period of the year is said to be the equinoxes. And equinox literally means equal night. Equa meaning equal, and nox meaning night in Latin. So it means an equal amount of day and night, all right, throughout the world, basically. This is the spring equinox, which is March 19th or 20th, and the autumn equinox, or fall equinox, which is September 21st or 22nd. At those two times of the year, the sun is actually at a 0 degree angle with respect to the equator of the Earth. So that's a line that is this horizontal line on this image, from equinox, the spring equinox at the left, to the autumn equinox at the right. The vertical line represents the time periods of the year that are known as the solstices. The solstices are the high point of the sun during the course of the year and the low point of the sun during the course of the year. So the summer solstice is around June 20th or 21st. That's when the sun has made its highest angle with respect to the equator of the Earth. The sun is at the highest point that it is going to be observationally located in the northern hemisphere. Conversely, when the sun is at the winter solstice, that's when the sun is at its lowest observational point with respect to the equator of the Earth. It is actually at a 23.5 degree south angle with respect to the equator, so that's its lowest point that it can observationally be observed in the southern hemisphere. Okay? So throughout the course of a year, the sun makes a journey from the 23.5 degree south latitude with respect to the equator. Then it goes, as the year progresses, it goes up to the spring equinox, whereas it is at a 0 degree angle with respect to the equator. Then it rises further into the northern hemisphere, and then it finally goes to its apex, which is at 23.5 degrees north latitude. And then it finally starts descending back again and goes past the autumn equinox, which is 0 degrees, again, right at the equator, finally back down to the winter solstice around December 21st, 22nd. The tropics on the Earth, these are latitudinal lines, okay? The 23.5 degree North Tropic is when the sun is at the summer solstice. That's called the Tropic of Cancer because the sun is actually getting ready to enter into the house of Cancer on the zodiac. It will be rising in front of the stars known as the constellation of Cancer at that time period. Conversely, when the sun is at its lowest point, it is at the Tropic of Capricorn because the sun will be rising in front of the constellation Capricorn at that time period of the Earth. That's 23.5 degrees south latitude below the equator. So the ancients depicted this quarterly time period, the seasons. They quartered the year by placing these two arms of the cross, these four arms, I guess you could say, the two crossbars of the cross forming four arms, the solstices, summer and winter solstice, and the equinoxes, spring and autumn equinox. And this formed a huge cross, which was what the sun was then placed upon. Again, this is all astro-theological underpinnings of Christianity, of exoteric Christianity that is based on astro-theology. We're not talking about the true esoteric tradition of real esoteric Christianity. We're talking about the astro-theological tale that is spun and given to the masses, the hordes of ignorant people, and told a story about the sun, and they're actually, giving that to people and telling them it's about the Savior of the world when in fact they're giving them a story about the sun. I've talked about this extensively on former broadcasts. I'm not going to get into the full story of astro-theology today. But another way of looking at this zodiacal breakdown of the year is that there really only were two seasons. The high point of the sun, when it's in the northern hemisphere, which is where most life on Earth is, and then the low season of the sun, the time that it was in the southern hemisphere. So from the spring equinox to the autumn equinox, the sun is in the northern hemisphere of the Earth. And that's the planting and growing season, and really the harvesting season as well. At least most of the harvesting season is during that time of the year. So you could call this top portion of the zodiacal year from, the top 90 degrees, the top 180 degrees, I should say, from the spring equinox to the autumn equinox. You could call this the season of life or the season of light, because that's when the sun is having efficacy and power in the northern hemisphere, and that's when crops grow for the majority of people on the earth. Then there was a season of darkness. That's a 6-month period where the sun is in the southern hemisphere, where much less of the population of the earth is actually located, far less. So this was known by the ancients as the season of death. Okay, it's the season that crops do not grow, and winter is coming in, and you're not going to do any real growing or harvesting of a lot of crops that sustain life, plant life that sustains life in the southern hemisphere. So that was a season of shutdown. That was a season of life going into dormancy. That was a season of plants going into dormancy. And that was a season of basically bunkering down and having to survive during inhospitable climate during that time of the year. Hence, it was known as the season of death or the season of darkness. Now, the ancients also had midpoints of these four seasons. Okay, spring, summer, autumn, and winter. The midpoints were also celebrated as important times of the year, particularly in occult circles. All right, these are known as Sabbats, S-A-B-B-A-T, and it's one of the places we get the word Sabbath from. So the Sabbath was a high holiday. All right, and it was different celebrations for different times of the year. The midpoint of spring, in which the fixed sign of the zodiac known as Taurus was the representation of the spring season, the bull. Okay, it's an earth sign, and again, it's one of what's called the fixed signs of the zodiac, forming what's known as the Great Cross. The Lesser Cross is, as we've already talked about, the cross of the solstices and equinoxes. But the Grand Cross was a galactic cross. See, the solstice and equinox cross, or the Lesser Cross, was the cross of the solar system. But then there's a galactic or Great Cross, which is formed by the midpoints of the seasons. We'll pick that up right on the other side of this break. Stay with us. I'm beginning the breakdown of the occult season of sacrifice to help everyone to understand what this time period is in the world of the occult, specifically the dark occult. We were talking about the seasons, how the ancients viewed the breakdown of the year as two basic seasons, one of light and life and one of darkness and death. And they had these midpoints that they celebrated, depicted here by these red arrows that go right through the middle points of the season, in the middle of each central zodiacal house, which are the fixed signs of the zodiac, forming what is known as the Grand Cross or the Galactic Cross, because it actually sets the reference for the center and edge of the Milky Way galaxy. So the midpoint of spring was known as Walpurgisnacht, or Saint Walpurgis's night, and it was May 1st, May Day, simply. That's the midpoint of spring. The midpoint of summer was, and I'll just briefly tell you what these seasons represented. The midpoints represented. This holiday represented fertility and the emergence of life, and also offering a sacrifice of some kind to ensure bountiful harvests during the coming growing and harvesting season. So again, spring is the planting season, where you want to get all your crops into the ground so that they grow bountifully and you have a good harvest so that you can feed yourself and your society throughout the winter period, the season of death. The midpoint of the summer season was known as Lammas. It's August 1st, or simply referred to as midsummer. And this was a season of thankfulness. It was a harvesting time of the year. It was a celebration of bounty and life again. And also it was being thankful for what you did have at harvest, or prior to harvest, because you knew that it was going to be time soon to dig in for the time period of darkness in which time the sun was going into the southern horizon and would basically stay there for 6 coming months. The midpoint of the autumn season was known as Samhain, or Hallowmas. We know it as Halloween. And it was celebrated around October 31st at the midpoint of Scorpion. Again, the midpoint of Leo is the midpoint of the summer. Okay, Leo is the lion. It's depicted as the lion because that's the time that the sun is roaring, and it's the time that the rays of the sun are emerging like a lion's mane. So very symbolic depictions. Again, the bull was chosen for the zodiac of Taurus because that's when the sun is beginning its charge up into the northern hemisphere, and it's charging toward its time period of greatest strength in the summer. The scorpion represented the time period when the sun was losing its power. Hence, it was stung by the venom of a creature like the scorpion, and it was on its way down to its lowest point of power, the winter solstice. So Hallowmas was always about the going into the season of death and looking on back on lost loved ones. It was a reflection time of the year, because you knew you were heading into the darkest and coldest point of the year, which is when the sun is at its lowest point of power in the winter. So October 31st, or the midpoint of fall Sabbath, Samhain, was about reflection and about the pondering of impermanence and death, and also about, again, preparation. So the last midpoint, or Sabbath, was February 2nd, which is known as Candlemas, or in some other older traditions like the Druidic tradition, it was called Imbolc. And this was a time period for looking forward to the coming year, because again, the beginning of the year was always looked at the time period when the sun would rise forward into the northern hemisphere of the earth. Again, the spring equinox, that was more celebrated as the beginning of the year than any other time period. Certainly not like we do in January, which is a more arbitrarily chosen point. The ancients viewed the time period when the sun would begin to rise up into the northern hemisphere as the beginning of at least the zodiacal year. In other ancient traditions, they viewed the low point of the sun as the birth and death point of the cycle. So because, it's at its lowest point or its death, and it's also at the point where it's going to begin to come up toward the northern hemisphere again to restart its circular journey around the course of its perceived revolution around the earth. So the midpoint of winter, or Imbolc or Candlemas, was celebrated at February 2nd, and this was a time period of prediction, of looking forward to the coming year, and also of making resolutions for the coming year, saying what you were going to do to create change, and hopefully following through with it. So it was a time of looking forward, and it was also a time where, the darkest and coldest period of the winter was, starting to move on, and you were looking forward to that spring time period at the spring equinox when warmer climate would lie ahead, and you would the sun would be emerging out of its tomb of the period time, the half of the year known as the time period of death or darkness, and coming back up into the northern hemisphere. So if we move to slide number 2, we can see this is another representation just showing where the sun is at particular times of the year. Again, it's at its lowest point between Sagittarius and Capricorn. That's when it's at the Tropic of Capricorn, 23.5 degrees south with respect to the equator. Then it's at its midpoints at the equinoxes, okay? And specifically at the spring equinox, it's rising up into the northern hemisphere, okay? If we then follow its progression, it goes up to the summer solstice. That's when it's at the Tropic of Cancer at the top of the zodiac. And then it turns back around and comes back down to the fall equinox, the autumn equinox, and then back down to the winter solstice, and repeats the cycle all over again. The special time period I'm talking about is from the time just after the spring equinox. Again, the spring equinox is March 19th or 20th, depending on the year. It's the time period the sun is exactly at 0 degrees with respect to the equator of the earth, meaning there are equal amounts of day and night, and the sun is rising into the northern hemisphere from the southern hemisphere. So the March 22nd is a very important date, and it's very synchronistic and synchromistic that my seminar in Asheville on New Age BS was conducted on March 22nd, because that's a very dark date, or a dark holiday, I guess you could say, for the dark occult. And I use it as an opportunity to spread some light to people in the Asheville area. And people came from all over the country for that event. I mean, there were people from California, Florida, New England, Ohio, Kansas, you name it, all over the entire continental United States. People gathered to check out this seminar. I was awed by it, and really appreciative that so many people traveled from so far away. And there were some Asheville locals there as well. So really good, diverse crowd. And this date is very important because it represents the third day after the exact time period where the sun is exactly at the equatorial point, 0 degrees with respect to the Earth's equator. 3 days after that, the sun is said to emerge from its tomb. And again, here we come into alignment with the astro-theological story of Jesus. He rises from the tomb after 3 days because he is the light of the world. The sun is the light of our world, the Savior that renews us each spring season and stays in the northern hemisphere until he finally goes into that fall period and then dies on the cross of the zodiac at the winter solstice. So again, this is astro-theological tale of religion. And we'll pick this up right on the other side of the break, and I'll fully explain when is the season of sacrifice when we come back. Let's go back to slide number 2 on the WhatOnEarthIsHappening.com radio show page. I was talking about the time period of the year where the sun actually breaks the plane of the equatorial plane. The sun actually moves from the 0 degree mark to just above the position that represents the 0 degree point, the actual equatorial plane. And when the solar disk fully breaks that plane, that day is March 22nd. Again, the equinox is March 19th or 20th. And then 3 days after that, the sun is said to fully emerge from its tomb. The light, the God's sun, emerges from its tomb, from its period of death. It had died 3 months prior to that, or in other words, days during the zodiacal year. Okay? The 3-month period from when it entered the house of Capricorn, progressing through Aquarius, through Pisces. That's the death season of the sun. It's the darkest time of the year. That's winter. Okay? The darkest and coldest time of the year. Finally, when the sun breaks the equatorial 0 degree point and starts making its way back up to the northern hemisphere, the season of life begins again and the world is rejuvenated. And that's the time of life bursting forward and spring, the emergence of spring, and things start to grow again. And we move into the planting season. And I'm not going to belabor this too much because we've already really gone into this. If people really want to hear a more extensive breakdown, you could check out show number 51 and 52, where I break down fully the season of sacrifice. But I'm just doing a review here. And at the bottom of this slide, you'll see a couple of Masonic tracing boards. In esoteric Freemasonry, this is well known that the path of the sun, and it represents symbolically light and darkness within the individual, and our journey, our path in consciousness, that we need to get away from earthbound identification and to higher godly thoughts, that represent light. And so the first degree tracing board, which is the tracing board of the entered apprentice, again, I've broken it down extensively over in many past shows, but just to do a very fast review, if you turn this tracing board onto its side 90 degrees clockwise or to the right, you'll see that what it really represents is the earth being the checkerboard floor of the house, which is that represents the lines of latitude and longitude of the earth. And that's the western direction because the earth is currently in darkness. And we need to move east toward the eastern direction up the ladder. And as we move up the ladder in consciousness, we're moving out of the season of darkness, which is down in the southern hemisphere, the direction south pinpointed there at the bottom, which represents the time of darkness, and progressing up to the light of the sun. Okay, so which is the light moving toward the northern hemisphere at the summer solstice. And the 3 initiates on the ladder represent knowledge, which is the desire to step into knowledge is coming off the floor of the house. True care is the green initiate in the middle, the place of balance, holding the key, which is the generative principle of care, of true care. And then finally, to right action, the initiate holding the child at the top of the ladder, which represents the solar child, the savior of the world, which is right action in the world. It's a beautiful symbol if it's decoded properly. Many people don't know the first thing about decoding any Masonic symbolism, including Masons, believe it or not, first and foremost, because they're Masons in name only, and they have no idea what the true esoteric tradition of Freemasonry is even intended to be about. They're in it for an old boys' club of receiving and doing favors for other people, not about receiving true moral instruction and the real difference between right and wrong modalities of behavior, which is what esoteric, true Freemasonry is supposed to be about, not the watered-down nonsense that is taught in lodge systems today, where they don't even teach them the proper decoding of their own symbolism. It's similar to what the church has done with esoteric Christianity, turning into exoteric Christianity and just turning it into a control system. It's no different. But this tracing board on the right-hand side is known as the tracing board of Tubal-Cain in the lower right-hand corner of slide number 2. This cryptic tracing board is about the season of death and darkness at the bottom portion, in which case the soul is actually in a tomb. And then that we need to burst forth from that tomb into the light of the northern hemisphere, where the light is actually, present, the season of life and light and enlightenment. And unfortunately, when we do that, we see that the world is in ruins. It's not a pleasant thing. The world is, we burst forth from that tomb of darkness of not being able to see the world as it really is. And when we finally do emerge into the light of day, we notice that the world is a horrible place. And it's a place of decay and death and ruin. And our job is to rebuild it, in a way that is in keeping with common sense and with truth and with right behavior, according to natural law. If Freemasonry is understood in the proper sense, people would receive those teachings, which is its original intent in the esoteric Masonic tradition, certainly not the exoteric lodge system tradition as it is taught today. But I've, again, gone over that so extensively in former podcasts on Freemasonry. You could get that all in the whatonearthishappening.com podcast archive. Just go to the podcast section, do a search on page for Freemasonry, and I did something like 10 or 12 podcasts on that tradition, breaking down pretty much all of its symbolism. So not to belabor that point, let's move on to slide number 3 about the season of sacrifice. This is the last slide about this particular topic for tonight. The date March 22nd is the official beginning of the season of sacrifice. Many rituals and many important symbolic things that were carried out are often done on March 19th. You could say March 19th is really the beginning of the season of sacrifice because it's the spring equinox. So many people will consider that's the actual beginning. I would say the official in earnest beginning of this occult season of the year, this 1/8 portion of the year. In other words, the first half of the spring season is actually March 22nd. And it comprises the last 9 days of March, from March 22nd to 31st, the entire month of April, and the first day of May, May 1st. That makes a total of 40 days. Again, that's a very highly symbolic and biblically symbolic number. 40-day time period represents a journey. It represents an odyssey. It represents a sacred journey in consciousness, biblically, throughout time, actually, in all kinds of esoteric traditions. 40 days is a symbolic spiritual period. Now, in the dark occult, okay, it's a very negative period. Now, they may not even look at it like that, but for the bulk of humanity, this is a dark time period. They look at it like a time to celebrate by giving a blood sacrifice to the sun and the earth. This is what you have to understand about dark occultists. Their god is literally the sun in many cases. Of course, it's the ego. Of course, it's the dark force which divides the consciousness of humanity, which you could call the opposer, the adversary, Satan. It doesn't make a difference what you want to refer to that force as. It's the adversarial force of consciousness. I don't look at it as an embodied entity, nor do they. But the sun is in many ways viewed as the literal or physical god of their tradition, of the dark occult tradition, which they will often refer to as Lucifer, the one who wants to be like the god of creation because of his form of light. And their form of light is dark light, the dark sun. That is their order, the order of death, the order of the dark sun. What this represents is knowledge being wielded as a weapon, the dark sun. It's the skull and the bones, intellect and action with no compassion, with no heart, with no spirit. We'll pick up the symbolism of the season of sacrifice on the other side of this break. You're listening to What on Earth is Happening. We'll be right back. This is What on Earth is Happening. I've been breaking down the occult season of sacrifice and some of its symbolic imagery. One of the images is the skull and bones. Again, they use the date 322, which is the beginning of the season of sacrifice, to actually represent their lodge. This is a clandestine lodge known as the Order of Skull and Bones, or the Order of Death, because it represents the dark sun. Once again, the dark side of the sun is the dark side of knowledge. It's using knowledge, which is represented by the skull. That's where knowledge takes place, within the brain, and the skull is the symbol of that. And then the bones, the crossbones, represent taking action with that knowledge, but you'll notice that there's something that's missing. Heart or care or the spirit is absent from that equation. So that's why they choose that symbolism. And you'll see it there on the left-hand side of image number 3 for tonight. You'll see the coffin of Hiram Abiff. This is the Masonic Hiram Abiff represents the Masonic Christ. He is the Masonic symbol of enlightenment. And it's about the soul's journey out of darkness and into light, out of the state of spiritual deadness, emerging from his coffin and resurrecting, okay, from a state of spiritual deadness or spiritual darkness to a place of enlightenment, to a mindset of enlightenment in consciousness. So on the coffin of Hiram Abiff here on the 3rd degree tracing board, you'll see the symbol of the skull and bones. That's what keeps Hiram Abiff in his grave. You have to transcend the skull and bones and develop true care in order to emerge from the grave, from the coffin of spiritual infancy and spiritual deadness. It's actually, again, a very beautiful symbol if it's decoded properly. Once again, many people have a very singular or unidimensional way of seeing Masonic symbolism and imagery, and this is largely propagated because Freemasonry has been co-opted and turned into something that is quite dark and not used for anything resembling its original intent or purpose, as I've said before. To continue on the season of sacrifice, what we need to understand about it is it is a time period which was traditionally about offering a sacrifice in the form of a blood sacrifice of animals or human beings to the sun and the earth at the beginning of the planting season of the year, or in other words, the first half of spring. If you look at the season of life, the 180 degrees section of the zodiac at the top portion, in the previous images I gave, you could break that down into 4 quarters. You have the 2 seasons, which, that's the quarter of the whole zodiac, spring and summer. But you each break those down into 2 components. So you have the midway points that separate those 2 seasons. The midpoint of Taurus, which is May 1st, Walpurgisnacht, and the midpoint of summer, which is August 1st, or Lammas Day. And that would therefore quarter that top portion of the zodiac, the top half, into 4 quarters. And the first quarter of that first season, or in other words, the first half of spring, okay, is the season of sacrifice. In other words, from the spring equinox to the midpoint of spring, the middle of Taurus, May 1st. And like I said, officially, if you really want to be technical about it, it is March 22nd, or 3 days after the beginning of spring, 3 days after the spring equinox, when the sun the solar disk has fully emerged into the northern hemisphere until the midpoint of spring. Again, the reason for this is because this is planting season. And if the sun is your god, that you're essentially worshiping as the giver of life on the earth in a physical sense, because that's what sustains life and grows crops that you're going to be dependent upon for life during the coming year, then you want to offer that God the sacrifice at the very point of his coming to power, which is the beginning of spring, specifically the first half of spring. So this is still done because the people who are this solar cult, who essentially came out of the ancient world and developed the systems of astro-theology and modern religion, are still in control. They still rule the world. And they are still practicing their rituals of sacrifice. And they do it in different ways now. They don't march people up a pyramid and carve their heart out with an obsidian blade. They don't tie someone down to a stone altar and, cut them open and let them bleed all over the stone anymore. They may do this in private rituals and ceremonies that they keep well hidden from the public, but in public, a different form of sacrifice takes place. And these are commonly known as, in today's parlance, false flag operations. They are psyops, psychological warfare operations, in the form of rituals. These are modern-day rituals of blood sacrifice that are conducted throughout the course of the year. And it's amazing if you really look at the patterns. And some people will say, oh, you're just seeing what you want. You're seeing the patterns you want. This is confirmation bias, etc., and so forth. And once again, I'll preface this by saying, hey, believe whatever you want. But nobody's going to tell me that all of these things don't amount to something that is larger than coincidence when I read you this list. Okay? Especially when you look at all the justifications that have followed these acts, and how many people have perished in these acts, and how long the media has gone on and on and on about them, and how politicians and control-based groups have all used these horrible, horrific circumstances as justifications to peddle forth draconian agendas. All right, nobody's going to tell me that's just coincidence that these all happened during this 40-day time period of the year. All right, so I'll read a short list. All right, and that's all I'm bringing this forward for people to keep in mind. You have to understand this is a time period these psychopath lunatics love to trot out an event to get people in deep levels of fear and give up more of their rights. So now is the time period to be hyper vigilant. I'm not saying anything's definitely going to happen. I'm saying it may very well occur during this 40-day period, which we are already in, which started on March 22nd, 1 week ago, and which progresses until May 1st, May Day. All right? So you really have to be on guard, be vigilant during this time. This is the time, if some event happens, it's almost guaranteed it's a false flag event. And it's done as a blood ritual, a bloodletting ritual during the season of sacrifice. Okay? So let's look at some of the events that have occurred during this season. The battles of Lexington and Concord were actually initiated by the British Empire against America. The opening acts, the opening volleys of the First American Revolution, April 19th, 1775, the battles of Lexington and Concord. And folks, let me tell you something. They love April 19th and 20th. If there's a particular date they love, that's it. Especially April 19th and 20th. Especially April 20th, if I even had to say one particular date. They love those two dates. Okay? That time period is special for these psychopath dark occultists. All right? I can't tell you exactly why it's around that date, but I know they love those two dates. And if there's any dates you want to watch and see, that is an event going to be taking place on this date that is there to inject fear into the consciousness of humanity, it is April 19th and 20th. All right? Above all other dates of the year. So April 19th, 1775, the British initiate the battles of Lexington and Concord. April 19th, once again, 1861, the Baltimore riots in Baltimore, Maryland. 13 people are killed during those riots. We'll pick up this list on the other side. Stay right there. I want to wrap up this spot on the season of sacrifice, maybe go to a couple of calls, and then I want to break into the second portion of tonight's show, which is to talk about psychopathy and its origins. So, this 40-day time period, all of these different events have happened within it. The battles of Lexington and Concord, the Baltimore riots, in which 13 people, another symbolic number, was killed, April 19th, 1861. The sinking of the Titanic occurred April 14th and into April 15th, 1912, resulting in 1,512 deaths. And folks, if you don't understand that was about really the murder of one individual, and 1,511 souls got caught up in a dispute between some elites, I feel bad for you, because that was about the Rothschild dynasty taking out one of the people who actually could have stood against them because of his enormous wealth as an industrialist, which was John Jacob Astor. And you don't think that these psychopathic lunatics would kill 1,500 people to get one person who could actually stand against them because of the enormous wealth he possessed, and he was challenging their agenda to bring in the Federal Reserve System at that time. You have another thought coming to you. That's the kind. Again, like they'll kill 3,000 innocents to usher in some war in the Middle East to seize resources that they want. These aren't people who think like you and I or have the moral sensibilities that you or I do. To ascribe our moral or ethical sensibilities to a psychopath is making a critical error in judgment. We'll talk about that later in the show. So, the assassination of Martin Luther King during the season of sacrifice, April 4th, 1968. Again, someone who was making significant inroads into the challenging of the dominant paradigm and who people were listening to. The Waco massacre. Again, the massacre at Waco, April 19th, 1993. They love this date. There's the third one. Okay, here's another one, the Oklahoma City bombing, April 19th, 1995. See, we're getting into rapid progression now, almost every year, every other year. The Port Arthur, Australia massacre, which ended up with total gun confiscation within the whole country of Australia, April 28th, 1996. The Heaven's Gate cult suicides, very strange with occult ritual overtones, possible MK Ultra mind control type stuff going on in San Diego, California. March 26th, 1997. I don't have the total number of deaths there. I'm sure it's some sort of a symbolic number. These lunatics, these lunatic dark occultists do love their ritualistic numbers and their gematria. The West Side Middle School massacre in Arkansas, March 24th, 1998. Again, at the beginning portion of the season of sacrifice. Here's a huge one to try to justify, weapons bans and, continued gun confiscation. The Columbine high school shootings, April 20th, 1999. Again, there's April 20th, Hitler's birthday as well, April 20th, 420. The Columbine shootings, again, that's another one named after the goddess. A lot of these rituals and blood sacrifices will be named after the goddess. Columbia is the name of the goddess because that's the destruction of care, the immolation of care, the cremation of care. See, it's just another symbolic of the burning of the goddess, another form of symbolism regarding the burning of care. So the Columbine shootings, April 20th, 99. The Iraq War begins on March 19th, the very beginning of the season of sacrifice. You could say that's even a couple days before its official opening. Right at the spring equinox. Okay, so the Iraq war begins with the shock and awe bombing campaign, which is actually another reference symbolically to the goddess, because it's not just shock and awe, it's Shekinah, Shekinah. The Shekinah is a Hebrew term to represent the feminine force, okay, invoking the feminine destructive force. Actually, it's like the Shiva force, okay, in the Eastern traditions, the Shekinah. And that was the occult overtones that opened up the war in Iraq on March 19th, 2003, the second Iraq war that was. So then we have the Virginia Tech massacre. Virginia Tech University, April 16th, 2007. Again, another pre-justification for starting to claim that we have to ban certain kinds of firearms. Okay? And again, named after the goddess, done at a school where it's named after the goddess, the Virgin. Okay? More goddess symbolism in a bloodletting sacrifice ritual. April 16th, 2007. The Moscow subway bombings, the metro bombings, were done on March 29th, 2010. The beginning of the BP oil spill, Hitler's birthday, April 20th, 2010. Okay? Which the toll is still going on uncalculated for that ecological disaster. Libya, the United States invaded Libya a few years back on March 19th. Once again, the very beginning of the season of sacrifice, March 19th, 2011. Libya was invaded. And just last year, the Boston bombing, April 15th, at the very, almost the middle point, just around the middle point of the season of sacrifice, April 15th, 2013, the Boston Marathon bombings. I mean, if you just think all that's just coincidence, I would make the statement you're a coincidence theorist. People will say, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. You think there's something to all of those dates. Well, in relationship to the significance of the season that is actually real and practiced by the dark occult, yes, that there isn't anything that is just coincidental about that. That is something that is deliberately done and planned for, if you ask me. Again, you can call me conspiracy-minded, but I've been involved in the dark occult myself. I know who these people are. I know what their personality type is. I know that they're psychopathic people. And I know they wouldn't hesitate for a moment, if it serves their agendas, to kill any number of human beings that they feel that they need to kill in a psyops ritual to get their agendas put forward. So people need to be aware this is real. This is still practiced by this dark priest class and these dark occult religionists. This is their religion. That's their belief system. You don't have to believe in it. Once again, you don't need to believe in what these psychopaths believe. They believe in it and they act on it. And if we don't understand their belief system, we're going to still see these events take place and play out and think it's all just coincidence and there's nothing to it, when in fact these are deliberately orchestrated events during a specific time period to carry out specific agendas that ordinarily they wouldn't be able to push through. So this time period that we are in right now is the time period we need to be the most hyper-vigilant about false flags. And I think that's all I'll really say on that topic for this evening. I think I've given enough information to whet people's appetite. And let's go to the phones. You're listening to What on Earth is Happening. Let's go back to Joe in Los Angeles. A
quick comment about what you were saying, the BP oil spill. That is definitely a blood sacrifice. The blood of the earth is oil.
That's right.
And I don't know if a lot of people realize that, but that is the blood of the earth. If somebody put an oil rig on your body and started sucking blood, you'd know it in about 2 seconds.
So that was a bloodletting ritual for the earth herself. They were attacking the earth goddess herself right there.
Absolutely. And people that don't, I can understand not seeing it in this awakening process, but once you hear that and learn that, if you don't believe that, you are like what you call the unbegun, because if you cannot see that, I mean, they're trying to kill us, dominate us and this earth, and they're doing it. They're doing a beautiful job.
Just think about all the names, okay? You know, you have the Port Arthur, King Arthur, a killing of a king ritual, Heaven's Gate, you know, it's an attack on the gates of heaven. Columbine, the goddess, you know, Virginia, the goddess. The BP oil spill was done to the earth with the, you know, letting forth the earth's blood. You think all of that is just accidental? You know, the Boston Marathon done at the place where essentially the American Revolution began. These aren't accidental things. I mean, people want to see coincidence everywhere. You know, it's not that people want to see conspiracy everywhere. We're seeing patterns. These aren't imaginary patterns, folks. These are patterns that really exist if you're conscious enough to see them. Go ahead, Joe.
That's very true. No, you're dead on as always. It's true, and it's always this attack on the innocent, the feminine, the children.
Yes.
You know, I mean.